Hello, everyone. It's me, Tanis McRae, and you're listening to Talking to Tanis, Evolve on Purpose on Transformation Talk Radio. The intention for my show has always been to highlight any systems, processes, people that I found have helped me in my self-awareness journey. And then to have a meaningful, conscious conversation about that expansion, about that growth, about evolving on purpose. Today, I have a very special guest. He's so special because I created him from scratch. That's what I always say. This is our oldest son, Nik McRae. So welcome, Nik.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Right from the start, I guess.
Exactly, right from the start. So yeah, I wanted Nik to come on the show, first of all, because I think he's an incredible intuitive, but also not very many people have had the opportunity to talk to maybe a mother-son team who are in that consciousness, in that evolving, in that growth together. And what does that mean? What does it look like? I can't tell you what it looks and means like for you, but I can certainly relay how it occurred for us. And the different systems and ways that we've worked together over the years to actually keep that growth and understanding in that relationship through all the times, life, because life happens, right? So I'm going to start with my story. So just a quick introduction into what catalyzed my path into evolving on purpose, into that expansion and that growth. So in about 1980, my mom started to get sick, and she was sick for many years, well into the 2000s. The doctors really couldn't find what was causing all of her symptoms. She wasn't really sick or ill. She just couldn't thrive. They diagnosed her as a celiac, so she was off all sorts of grains. She basically was off all preservatives and additives and everything in her food. She developed a lot of allergies. She couldn't touch any synthetic material. So the only thing she was able to tolerate was natural fibers like cotton and wool and silk. And that just went on for like 30 years. And in the early 2000s, she started to kind of give up. Up until then, she hadn't really given up. She's a farmer's wife. She doesn't give up. But she did. So what I did is I found a naturopath who was really into all levels, not just the physical health, but emotional, mental, and spiritual health. And she told my mom she had parasites. So she started this really great program just to help rid her body of parasites. And then we started working on emotional, remembering how to live like a healthy person. This happened right around when Nik was around 10 or 11. And I don't usually do things halfway, so I went all in. And I decided I'm really going to explore this idea that your health, your well-being, has emotional, mental, spiritual, as well as physical components. And so I started taking all the courses I could find and reading about consciousness, about awareness, about natural, holistic healing, but not really aimed at the physical body. It was aimed at the emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of the body, and started to have an incredible result, not only personally, but my mom, completely healed, can eat anything she wants, wear anything she wants now. And I always say the proof is in the pudding. And right around this time, Nik had been born with a milk sensitivity. And he didn't have the natural responses that kids do. It wasn't physical so much. There was some physical aspects, but really it changed his demeanor and it changed his personality. And the doctors were not open to hearing that from me. And so I'd say, this changes him psychologically. He loses sentience. Like, we can't find him when we look in his eyes when he's eaten milk. My doctor even went so far as to say, it sounds like you've convinced yourself that that's what's going on. And so at 3 years old, we had taken him, I made the decision to kind of go rogue and take him off all milk products just to see if there was an improvement, and there was. So he lived from about 3 years old until I started doing this energy work. And he asked me one day, he said, Mom, do you think we could get rid of my milk allergy? And I said, well, I don't think I can, but I think you can. And that's when we started really working together in that consciousness, in that awareness journey. And that's what opened this all up for me. And so I want to bring Nik in, and he can talk a little bit about what catalyzed him. That was my catalyst with him, but he's his own person, so that's not necessarily the catalyst for him. So Nik, would you like to share your part of the story of that growing up in awareness?
Yeah, well, and it did really start again with the naturopath for me as well. But I just remember you took me there, and I was sitting in the waiting room hearing you guys talk to each other. And I remember clearly her saying, until he reaches an enlightened state, he will never be able to have dairy. And I didn't know what that meant, but if it allowed me to feel normal, to have ice cream and pizza and all these things I couldn't have, at birthday parties and things like that, I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to do it. And so then, of course, like with you going down the road that you were on, I resented it, a rebellious kid. Like, I don't want any of your voodoo stuff in my life. I don't really want to deal with this. But at a certain point, like you said, when I started to clue in that this was working, I thought, well, can you help? Like, I would do anything to be able to have dairy, and so that was kind of the very basic start of it. And then once I remember we would do Reiki every night, and we'd sit and we'd process the emotions and process all of the stuff. I remember I think I was about 13 when I first had dairy, because we had set a date, and it was sometime in October. Yeah. And I remember saying, well, we're at that date, let's try it out. And you did the muscle testing where you hold the dairy. I think I had a cheese string in one hand, and then you push on my other one, and it didn't go down for the first time. And so I was convinced at that point, like, I must be okay with it. And so, yeah, that's when I started to incorporate it more. But where the conscious work really hit for me was throughout the teenage years, because once I could have milk, it was like, whatever, this is off the table again. I don't really care about this. But through years of addiction and dissociation and, self-destructive tendencies, it got to a point where, all my friends are starting to go down into really bad places and, dying and things like this. And I just thought, I need to go the other way. Mom, I need your help again. I need to open back up to this. I need to really embrace this as my own. And that for me truly was the start of my conscious journey.
And I remember that day you walked into my office here in the house and you said, Mom, can you pull a card for me? And, I was all cool because, I'm like a cool mom. But I was like just screaming on the inside, because through those years of you really consciously going into the darkness, going into the shadow, going into addiction, you don't know that that's going to be okay. You don't know. As a parent, you don't know if that's going to be okay. One of the things I know I strove to do was always keep that communication open to say, you can talk to me. Not that he did, but at least it was always presented there for him. The other thing I always did is I would say to myself in those darkest moments for me, I would say, I know who you are. And I always had a sense, because of all of the energy work, because we had done those years of Reiki first, I really knew the essence of him, not just because I created him and gave birth to him and raised him, but that's physical. I'm talking about his internal person. And when people medicate with drugs and alcohol, it actually, it distorts that essence feeling to a certain degree. And then he had went to a retreat in Sedona, and he come off the plane, and I said to him, "You're you." And he goes, "I know." And that's when that essence matched again. Do you remember that, Nik?
I do. And I remember, as with all things, it's always the things I resist the most that seem to give me the most benefit. And I didn't want to have those sessions, and I didn't want to go to Sedona, and I fought everything tooth and nail in my stubborn way because I felt like I knew everything. But yeah, I remember coming home from Sedona. It was the day of my 21st birthday, when I had done all the shadow work and gone through all those dark nights and really worked with you a lot. And at that point, I really realized, like, you're right. Like, I haven't been myself. Like, I've been dissociated, and this is what it feels like to be embodied, fully embodied. And that was where the work really started to kick off for me, beyond my own personal work, into making this a journey or a service that I want to do with other people as well.
Exactly. That was important, right? That was an important aspect for us. I think it was an important moment for us to meet again, past that. And I remember we were having that conversation once when I said to you, I don't know if you'll ever understand how painful that was for us to watch. And you said, Mom, I don't think you'll ever understand how painful it was to go through. And I know when we met there and sort of acknowledged each other's pain and made that okay, there was a connection again from that other side. But I know myself, I don't think that I could have worked in my own shadow without a road I ever chose to go down. And so walking through it from my point of view with you really was a lot of shadow work for me too, because as your mom, that's a big fear for anyone, that you're going to lose your child, right? So we're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to start talking a little bit more about that conscious journey, when it started, when we sort of met again after that shadow work. Thank you. Stay tuned. Nik and I will be right back. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Talk Radio and me, Tanis McRae, with Talking to Tanis, Evolving on Purpose, with my very special guest, our son, Nik McRae, who is an intuitive astrologer and reader. And, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but the apple has to grow, the tree has to grow the apple as well. And we were just talking about, before we left, the shadow work, which, people can call addiction on a physical level, but really it's, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Like I said before, that's not something I actually chose as a person, as a teenager, as an adult. And so when that happened with Nik, and I'm going to get Nik to speak to this, that was very difficult because I wasn't sure what I had done wrong. You want to speak to this, Nik?
Yeah, and it was never anything that someone does wrong. And I think that a lot of people get in that misconception that it's their fault their child went down this road, or their fault that this shadow work has to be done. But for me, it was never the case, nor was it ever something I was obstinate to. It was never, oh, I'm never going to try drugs, I'm never going to do these things. It was like, when I get the chance, I will, because I was curious, eternally curious. And I remember always hearing, like, you're real. You're real when you've experienced dark. You're real when you've experienced depth. And I always thought, like, I'm not getting that here. Not in the sense that I thought real was. And so a part of it for me was that it was a part of myself that I needed to explore, and a part of myself that I felt was a necessity even to bring to the family, because I felt like there was so many perspectives that weren't being shown. And so as a part of my journey, it was a little bit of escapism, a little bit of rebellion, but also it was just, there was a deep shadow in always from the time I was a kid. I remember me drawing monsters and people dying, and people would get nervous, and you'd be like, well, he's a really good kid, so I don't really think it's something to worry about. But for me, it was like, I need to know what it's like to experience darkness and death and shadows and rebellion. And so that was part of the reason why I chose to do it for me, regardless of the aftermath of it that it caused on my family, not only because I was numb to it at the time, but because I felt like you all need to know what this is like too, even if it's vicariously.
Yeah, and of course I didn't have that perspective until it was over. When you're in the middle of a tsunami, you're not wondering why you're in the tsunami. And so that perspective definitely came in the years after you started asking for more help to come out of that. And I think that's really important. One of the things that was real for us is that Nik was never mean to us. You know how often there's a lot of meanness that comes with that kind of addiction or medication. And I don't remember him being mean. I remember him just choosing and just flatly refusing to follow rules. So we had to take away all the rules. But he was never mean to us. There was never screaming, I hate you, that kind of thing. And I think that helped me, because I knew he'd always say, Mom, I love you, but I'm choosing this for me. I didn't understand it at the time. And maybe you want to speak to that. I'm choosing this for me. That's what he kept saying. Mom, I'm choosing this for me. This is something I'm not doing against you. And I remember once I said to him, how did I raise a child choosing this? And he said, Mom, you didn't. You raised a child who loves, who's kind, who cares about people, who wants to help the world. I'm choosing this.
Well, and in that world, there is kind of an obscure bliss that comes with it. Everyone is so kind of rigid and judgmental, through those teenage, junior high years. Everything is all innocent, but it's, kids are pretty mean when it comes right down to it. And so when you start in this path of drugs, a lot of the time it's all of these kids that never really had close connections or had trouble at home or all of these things like that. And so for me, this is where I felt like the work needed to be done. This is where I was making these connections and sharing my love, and where so much transcendental experience was happening for me. Like all of my first activations were all because of drugs. And it was an interesting contrast too, because I was choosing these things for me. This was an inevitable path that I felt like was necessary for me to learn from. And to this day, I would not be the man I am if I hadn't experienced those dark places and worked with those people and seen the love in the dark and in these dank places. But an interesting part of all of this too is that I would always want to skydive. So I'd come in, be in a really low place, and I'd come do a session with you or someone else, and I'd get my vibration right high. And then I'd go and do drugs immediately after and just shoot that vibration right down. And so it was almost a roller coaster that made me realize that so many people, whether, artificially driven by drugs or not, are going through this roller coaster, and they're trying to fight the downs. They're trying to fight the dark. It's all love and light and it's supposed to be good vibes. And I just realized that's not the case. Like, we need to work in our shadows and we need to work in the dark side. And for me, I felt like I had a certain level of depth or resilience that I prided myself on, that came from being able to reach those high peaks of awareness and enlightenment with you, and then way down back into the darkness, with the people I was associated with. Mm-hmm. And to bring the light and bring the love from that dark, or from the light into the dark, and then bring the dark back up into the light, so there could be a balance.
I know have to do drugs and whatnot to get this experience. This was something Nik chose to do for him. And I know, what made you decide then that was enough? Like, what really created that space where you're like, okay, this no longer is the tool I'm going to use to have this experience?
Well, if I'm being blunt, it was the drugs just got harder and harder. It wasn't just partying anymore. It wasn't just joking around and having fun. It was needles, and it was dark times, and it was people getting shot and people going to jail, and people that I loved, people that were close to me that I held, and they were having psychosis and all of these things. And I just thought at that point, like, I need to go the other way. And that was around 18. When I really decided, like, I'd been doing sessions with you, doing the skydive and things like that. But that was when I really discovered, like, I need to go the other way. At that point, I even wanted to kill myself. And I just thought, like, I couldn't do it. Like, as much as I was so self-centered, like, I couldn't leave the mess for everybody else. And that really rang true for me. Like, this is a duty that I have to fulfill now. And so that's when I really decided, like, I had already kind of started doing readings. I had already kind of started opening up to this stuff, but was still skeptical and still obstinate. And so when I really decided I had to turn the other way, that was once again where I came to you and said, I need this. I need this help. I need to hone the light in myself again. And so that was what really instilled it in me to go the other way. And that is a long journey, a journey I maybe am still even on, who knows? But I know that for sure it was between 18 and 21, between that period in Sedona, where that was where the deepest shadow work went, where I thought I was alive and I thought I was awake and I thought everything was clear and I was grown up, only to hit another series of brick walls to remind me we've got a lot of work to do.
Right. And what What systems did you find that really helped you? I know I was able to be there. I specialize in emotional trauma, so I was able to help with that. I was able to do some past life work with you, but mostly just be that sounding board, right? And holding that light. And I know you once said to me, I always see you as, this bright light in that shadow. Mom, you're always right there. And that was on purpose for me, was to stay at that high vibration and not dive down into it too far, because then I am a place to go. Do you know what I mean? As an energy source for you. But what would you say, which systems have really assisted you in this
Well,
journey?
again, the systems to me were secondary because this was how I felt I was raised. I didn't take Reiki courses. I didn't learn about chakra balancing or quantum touch or any of this stuff. It was inherent. It was something that I was like, well, if she's always done it on me, I know how to do that. That's a part of my upbringing. But the systems that really worked for me was, of course, astrology. I remember when I got this first reading with Deborah Silverman, you were like, this lady on the phone, you got to talk to her. I was like, I am not talking to that person on the phone. And you're like, she's already on the phone and I already paid for it. So like, you've got to talk. Fine. So I would lie, I'd embellish, I would exaggerate, and everything she said was right. And I was blown away by this because I'm a pretty skeptical person by nature. And when someone on the phone who I know knows nothing about me knows all these things about me, now I was starting to get curious. And that's also, a few years later from that, when I started to actually do these readings and realize, like, wow, when I started to look into astrology, you're not crazy. This is just your design. You've got a Gemini mind, a dualistic mind. You've got Pluto opposite of that, making this intensity. So there's all these little factors that played in. And then, of course, with the human design work, too, understanding that I was a manifester and that you were a projector was really eye-opening as well, just to realize I can't be controlled. All I can do is just inform people of who I am and what I want and just hope that people accommodate that in some way. And I realized, too, all of the times where I felt like you were trying to be invasive, it was just your aura. You just want to get in there and see what's going on. And only when I let you in was that able to happen. But ultimately, when it comes to any spiritual concept, awakening, any of it, what really stood out the most to me was that you never lie, ever. And that was something where when you would be really invested in these things and you'd be telling me these stories about these amazing things that happened with you and your clients, this is the person that I know is the most honest and trustworthy person in my life, especially working in these undertones of society where there's lots of lying and manipulation and, drug addicts will do anything really to get what they want. You were total opposite. You would never lie. You would never embellish. And so I knew you were telling the truth when you said these amazing stories. And so for me, that was also a little bit of proof in itself that if these things were happening to you and you were sharing these stories, this had to be real. This had to be true.
Well, thank you. It's true. And one of the things Nik said earlier, he's endlessly curious. When he was a little boy, like before school age, we would tell him he could ask questions on our car trips for 45 minutes to an hour, and then he had to do something else. And I was absolutely dedicated to the fact that whatever question he asks me, I will give him the truth. He has mind like a steel trap. He doesn't forget anything. So I wasn't going to dumb anything down. I mean, I certainly didn't go into great detail, but I was always extremely conscious that I needed to be truthful with him and not just sort of brush it aside or avoid it, even if it was a difficult conversation with the difficult questions. That was very important to me. And I see now that that was really important at that other stage outside, when you were finding your way back to you. That was important to you. Thank you for that. I want to go back to the human design. So there's two things. Human design wise, Nik is a manifester. I'm a projector. And Nik, if I always say if I had one do-over, I would know that Nik is a manifester when he was born. And the reason why is because I am a school teacher. And rules are how I just know how to manage things. And so he did not respond to rules in the same way most children respond to rules. And so I had to kind of learn trial by fire that he really just needs to be informed. He's going to make his own decision, but he needs the information to do that. And I mean, it already started that with answering the questions, but I was trying to be a good parent and keep rules there. And, like I had learned to be in a school teacher, and those were not working. And they especially weren't working when he was a teenager. And so that was really important. And one of the things I tell people, just have a little look. There's free charts for your human design. Just check in, see what your child is. You don't have to look at it ever again. But if they're a manifestor or a projector or a reflector, I would do just a little bit more research, because they are more uniquely situated than the majority of the population, which are generators. And so because they're a majority, there's more commonalities between that group of people, whereas there's slight differences to people who are manifestors and projectors. And like Nik said, I'm a projector. My aura, my energy penetrates. It goes right in and goes, hey, what's going on in here? And that's not something I choose. That's something that is inherent in that design. So if you're talking to me, I'm concentrated on you. I am right in there with you and experiencing your energy. That's why I was able to grab onto Nik's energy so much through those years, because I knew his energy signature. And that's just a function of having that sacral being undefined. And do you want to speak a little bit to a manifestor? Because again, I think that's important. I think people need to know just the subtleties and the differences that can help a parent or a child if they have that knowing.
Yeah, well, and when it comes to generators, it's really just that they're so much more diverse. When you have a sacral defined, you're automatically a generator of some kind. So there's so many more frameworks that can operate out of that. Whereas when you're a projector, a manifestor, reflector, there isn't a whole lot of diversity in that. And so there is very kind of specific ways you want to work with that energy, because generators are going to envelop, they're going to bring the world into them and really incorporate this. And that's a beautiful way that helps us to kind of connect, the ones that have these different kinds of auric fields. But with the manifestor, it's something that repels, it pushes away, and that's how it makes an impact. It pushes up against other people's energy, and it gives an energy of movement, an energy of a push. And how often I like to say this is like a north magnet to a south magnet. If something is meant to be in your life, it just snaps right into you. But if something is not meant to be, it'll push away. And so naturally, in times like I mentioned before, when I wanted to let you in, there's like a north and a south magnet. You snap right in. The messages are absolutely clear, absolutely relevant. But in times where I was very stubborn and didn't want you to help and didn't want to let you in, then of course it's like a north magnet to a north magnet. It's just going to push you away, and there's going to be a repel to it. And even as a kid, I didn't have a lot of rules. Like I remember the first time you let me stay home alone, I think I was like 8 or 9, or I don't know. I always wanted to. It was like I just begged and begged and begged, and finally, like, fine, I'm just going to be gone for like a little while. Like, I'll let you stay home for a minute because you're begging so much. I remember she left, and I was like, so what am I not allowed to do? I couldn't really think of anything. And so I remember I was like, I'm not allowed to drink alcohol. So I went and took a swig out of a bottle. I was like, bleh, no, that was no good. I'm just going to go play video games or something. And so I never really had a ton of rules. So in the teenage years, when it was like just trying to break free of any kind of residual rules or any kind of frameworks, the reason why I thought it was justified is because I felt like there was a strong level of integrity and a moral compass that was instilled in me, from you and family, big family and everything like that. And as you said, I never had an intention to hurt anybody. I just wanted to do what I knew was best for me, whether it was good for me or not. That's what I thought was best. So in that time, it was really just about, you guys didn't understand, in my opinion, that I'm not doing anything immoral in my eyes. I'm not doing anything unintegral. In fact, I'm taking all of the integrity and morals and light that you guys instilled in me and used as an expectation. And I wanted to bring that to the world that I felt like didn't have so much of that, or that, people that needed to be exposed to that more. And so for me, that was always why I felt like I was never breaking rules, quote unquote, because to me, there wasn't any rules. There was only a moral compass that I wanted to follow. And I knew that in all of what I was doing, I was in alignment with that moral compass that was instilled in me. And so that's something that even to this day, what I still hold myself accountable to is this strong level of integrity and this strong moral compass. And so, yeah, that was kind of what I oriented myself in regards to rules. Like, there's no rules, there's just morals. And that's why I needed the information in order to be able to apply my moral compass to the direction I wanted to head, rather than give me a restriction or a limitation. Well, if you're giving me something I'm not supposed to go beyond, the thing I want must be past it, or you wouldn't restrain me from it.
And I remember one of the things that was a conscious decision from both your dad and I was to make the connections with the people that were in your life. I mean, we had one of your friends live with us for 2 years, and I mean, you guys were deep in the addiction, and yet I didn't feel like pushing you away was the right thing. It was more, I just want to keep connecting. Again, it could be a projector thing, but it was like, I really just want to keep that connection, because I think of all the things that were going to, like you said, help you through that process, it was the moral compass. It was the innate integrity. And I know that he was very appreciative of that. And I feel like, we were never felt like we were in danger, or that, in fact, we loved all of your friends, even though they were having those choices, and I was able to connect with each one of them. I think each one of them sought out help from me spiritually. And that changes. I mean, you see, like you said, you see the people, not the addiction. And wow, what a gift. What a gift to give people. And I'm so proud of you for that. I'm proud of you for bringing that to a space that not many people, they see it as an illness. They see it as a destruction. They see it as a victim. But really what you're saying is that's not the case. It's choosing. And again, coming from trauma inside of them.
Yeah, and almost all of them are flourishing in their own way, like it's that years of just needing to face the dark, especially in my generation, this millennial generation with this Pluto and Scorpio. We're here to really expose the dark sides of human nature. We're here to bring the depravity that's been hidden out of the woodworks. And so as a part of that, we have to all experience that in some form individually, whether it be through trauma or self-imposed destruction or external destruction in some way. It's really a generational importance that's inherent in us. And so that is also a thing that I felt like was important to mention, in that every one of the people that I chose were in alignment with that moral and that integrity. And all of them have made such an impact on me in the way that I did on them, and the way that you did on them. And that was something that you never judged really any of them. You would say, all right, how many pairs of shoes are at the door? How many people am I feeding? Rather than, get your friends out of the house. I don't like these guys. It was very much in alignment with, if you believe that they are meant to be here, well, then we trust you on that. And so that was something, again, I also respected a lot, because even though you didn't agree with my choices or agree with the things I was doing, you still respected my opinion and my judgment enough to know that what I was doing must have some reason, even if you couldn't see it. And going forward now in my professional readings and everything like that, it's a thing I still really focus on, is like, what levels of integrity or awareness was I raised with that I can share with other people, and what levels of awareness have I discovered on my own through deviating from the way I was raised and what I was doing. And so that's where I think the manifestor aura and disposition was very helpful. Also, as much as that I have an emotional authority and you don't, so I'm projecting my emotions onto you, and you're projecting your identity onto me. And so when we came together, there was always a really powerful collaboration in our ability to kind of expand emotional awareness, and for me to be able to find that awareness within myself.
Mm-hmm. And I think that brings us to a beautiful time to talk about our Saturns. So between 28, I'm not the astrologer. You go ahead and tell us, what is Saturn return? What is it? What does it mean?
So between the ages of about 28 and 30, what happens is the planet Saturn comes back to where it was when we were born. It's made a full revolution. And so when we look at Saturn, it literally has rings around it. It's a planet of restriction, a planet of life lessons. It's maturity, it's growing up. And so because I was born exactly on the degree of your Saturn return, we have a strong karmic bond in that, especially being in Aquarius at this last degree. It's about, how do we work with innovation, independence, and authenticity in a way that is secure in who we are. And so both of us have this very strong level of independence and innovation, And the clash in that, or the wisdom in that, is that it's both very different, even though it's the same energy. And so we would restrict and expand one another. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic, because it's like, you're here to teach me my greatest life lessons. I'm here to teach you your greatest life lessons, whether they be restrictive or whether they be, deeply based in wisdom.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah. And don't forget, if you have any questions for Nik and I, we'll address them when we come back from the break. But yeah, that was a really beautiful thing when I found out that we were teacher student, basically, for each other. And that dynamic that was very, quote unquote, and it's not difficult. It's just uncomfortable. You know what I mean? In many respects, but at the same time, there was such growth and richness in it that we were in that sort of byplay. And one of the things that I needed to always keep in my mind was to honor this person, not just as my kid, but as a person. You know what I mean? To really listen. And I think that's really important, that not to take your baggage into raising of your child either, right? You just to work on that, or to acknowledge it, so that you know at least that it's part of how you're dealing with your child. I had to go against a lot of really what people would think you should do with a teenager who's doing that. And I'll address that quickly when we come back, because as a parent, a lot of people had judgments and opinion about how I was choosing to deal with what Nik's choices were. And I think that's important. I'll talk about that when we come back. And we'll see you soon. Be back soon. Welcome back to Talking to Tanis, Evolve on Purpose on Transformation Talk Radio. And today, again, I'm with a very special guest, our son, Nik McRae. And we've been talking about our experience between, basically being a parent and a child, and going through sunny times and shadow times. And it's something I've always called conscious parenting. And this is what I talked about just before we went, about your baggage. And it's not, you can't not bring baggage in. You've had a life. There's conditioning and beliefs and patterns, and you're going to bring that in. But there's an importance of consciousness there. And that's why I use the word consciousness a lot, am I responding to something that my child is experiencing, or am I acting out of an old pattern? And that's just awareness. That's consciousness. And it just takes a second for you to say, okay, is this coming from how I was raised? Is it still relevant? Is it working? That's always a really important question that I don't think people even ask themselves half the time. Is what I'm doing working? And maybe, like I said, if I'd known he was a manifester, that gives me a bit of insight, so that I had more results because it's working, and not positive results, just results. It looked like we made some headway. And whatnot. So I think that's a really important thing, because like I said, I did not handle this in a way that a lot of people would handle this. That was also that was difficult for me, because of course, recognition is important when you are a projector. And I've always felt like I was having to go against sort of the norm. I can't tell you how many people said, haul him into rehab, or do this or do that. And I did not feel, just deep down, that was the right thing for him. And I remember once he brought him in on a session with a mom who was having trouble with her teenager. And Nik, you said, if mom had done, dad had done what a lot of other parents do, I probably would have chose something much more dire. Do you remember that? I don't know if you remember, but
I'm not sure. I just know that there was like a certain level of, as I said before, integrity to follow. I knew I couldn't go way, way off the deep end. I had to go as far into that dark room as I could, but keep it tethered to, like, I can't stay here forever. And that was why when I hit those really dark points around 18, where I wanted to end it and I wanted it to be over and I couldn't handle it anymore, why I turned the other way, and I started heading back towards that light to say, like, I need help. I need to get back. And so I don't remember specific conversations or anything because everything in that time was so blurry. But I do recall just being kind of welcomed back. There wasn't really any resentment as a part of it.
Right.
It's kind of celebrated, honestly.
Right. And that's important, because I always say it's easy to love our children when they're doing everything we ask. But it's more important to love them when they're doing something you don't agree with, because that's what unconditional love is. It's like I said, that's easy. It's easy if he was doing everything you said. I mean, of course I love him, but when he really noticed when I really noticed he needed our reassurance of our love, was when he was doing something we did not agree with. And that was a big part of it for me, was to continue and maintain that connection, energetic connection and communication connection. And that's, if I had any advice to give anybody, for what it's worth, it would be, don't let those connections break. Stay connected to the essence of your child. Your child, and understand that they're in a journey as deep and as rich and as important as your journey, and that you're in it together, and that if you remember that with one another, that's an important bond. And I believe I've heard this lately, when they're talking about helping people in addiction, it is about maintaining and creating bonds and connections, so that, again, and I felt like I was able to do that with not only Nik, but with his friends. And, like I said, I counted shoes, and then I bought that much groceries, because I thought, at least I'm going to keep these children, because they were just children, I'm going to keep these children fed, and I'm going to give them a safe and soft place to land. And that didn't mean that they were allowed to take advantage of that. And, they didn't. And and like Nik said, there was a lot of trust there. And then there had to be trust there for Nik as well.
Well, and as a part of that too, it's as much important to maintain the connection as it was space and boundaries. Like there would be weeks sometimes where we wouldn't see each other, and we're in a dark place. And, it was like, rather, like sometimes it would come up and we'd just kind of clash, and it'd be like, fine, I'm going to leave again. And I'm sure that's difficult too, probably a lot more difficult for you than it was for me, because I was just in it at the time. But it's very important to remember that, like, when you're chemically addicted to something, it's beyond your conscious control, and so having the connection is important, and maintaining that frequency inside yourself, but the boundaries and the space is equally as important, so that there isn't retaliation, there isn't manipulation in any of that as well. So that, of course, someone in this position isn't going to take advantage of that. And as you said, we didn't, because there was a boundary and there was a space that needed to be upheld as well.
Right. And that boundary for me was love, but not being allowed to be manipulated either. You can see energetically into the manipulation of people when I can only talk to it from my point of view of energetics. So I can sniff out that inauthenticity. And so I would not respond to that. So lots of times I would say to Nik, when he was having a conversation with me and he wasn't really there, I'd say, you know what, I actually want to talk to you when you're back. And he would always smile, because he knew what I meant. It was like, I'm not going to talk to this manipulator. I'm going to talk to that child and that person that's behind that. And so I said that a lot, of like, no, I don't want to talk to this person. Come back when I can talk to my son, Nik. And you kind of took that in your stride. But that was a boundary.
Of course. And you never gave me money or anything. It was like, If you're hungry, I'll make you some food. Other than that, you're on your own, man. You got to deal with your own stuff. And so I think that that's an interesting dynamic in it too. And ultimately, that's what led me to want to be more self-sufficient. Even from the time I was 16, I want to be able to make my own way. I want to be a man. I want to be a provider and a supporter, and I want to be independent. And, joke's on me. It took me a long time to get there because of all the cleanup that had to be done. Psychologically, materially, and otherwise. And I've lost everything multiple times in my life, from going into complacency or disconnect. But what I've noticed, especially embracing this more as my vocation, is that the more that I embrace my conscious awareness, my self-awareness, and the discipline in following through with that, the more I thrive. And so that's kind of brought me to where I am today, and being able to thrive in this as a skeptic, but also as a believer, because I always say I'm an eternal skeptic, and the day this work proves itself wrong to me is the day I'll stop doing it.
Yeah, well, let's take a minute and talk about what you have to offer and how people can get a hold of you and what they can expect from that connection.
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is honestly through email. I have a Facebook page and I have an Instagram and things like that, but not a very good millennial. I don't keep up on that stuff very well. So basically, the easiest way to get a hold of me is just through email, beyond ironic with a K at the end, at gmail.com if you want to inquire or have questions. And as a part of the session, I do the energy work and, all of the stuff that you taught me how to do as a child. But what I do is I use the astrology and human design to get a frame of reference on who this person is and the timing that they're in. And I use that information or those maps to create a you inside of me that I understand, so that I can custom suit the information, advice, intuition, whatever you want to call it, in a way that you learn specifically. And of course, I've been teaching for Deborah's astrology school now since 2016. And who would have ever thought, me being the horrible student that I am, that I would teach her one day? I guess that's something you instilled in me as well. So basically I just try and apply all of the knowledge I was raised with and all of what I've learned in my own experience, and try and apply my personal experience through these frameworks to give advice and to give messages. It's basically the gist of it, if I were to put it in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know I may be a tiny bit biased, but he's an exceptional intuitive reader, and I say that as a colleague, and of course as his mom. And so, yeah, absolutely. You can look on my website. I have Nik's information there as well. So if you go to the talk radio portion of my website, you'll find a link for his Facebook page there. And I will link your email as well there. So you can always go to tanismcrae.com and link to Nik through there as well. I just want to thank you so much for coming on and letting us just have this conversation, Nik, and for letting us just sort of explore this sort of mom and son dynamic that's sort of based in consciousness. My next show will be Friday, March the 20th, and I'm having Leanne Wolf back, and we're going to be talking sort of take 2 on the human design system. It's coming up a lot. So I just want to continue on with the part of that really does assist us. Remember, you can find my upcoming courses and how to connect with me through tanismcrae.com. And before I leave you, I'll leave you with my message. If you don't decide who you are, the experience will. So make certain that you're the chooser of your experience. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Remember, always give yourself permission to be who you are. And if you want to explore what that is, then by all means, continue to explore and do that. Anything else before we go, Nik, that you want to say?
No, I'm just grateful to be on here and being raw and honest about everything. And I just want to thank you for being my mom.
Well, thank you for being my kid, my son. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you have questions or anything, please don't hesitate to email me or put them in the comments of our Facebook Live video. We'll see you again on Friday, March the 20th. Same time, same place.